The world loves a perfect story. A young woman meets a prince, falls in love, marries into one of the most famous families on Earth, and then walks away from it all to build a new life on her own terms. That's the version most people know about Meghan Markle. For years, the narrative has been clear: a modern woman who refused to play by outdated rules, someone who stepped away from royal pressure to protect her peace, her family, and her future with Prince Harry. But here's where the story gets uncomfortable. Because long before the documentaries, the interviews, and the carefully crafted public appearances, there were three people quietly telling a very different version of events: her father, her mother, and her sister. Thomas Markle, Doria Ragland, and Samantha Markle have all described something strange. Not just a family disagreement, not just a messy falling out, but a pattern. A pattern of distance, a pattern of silence, and in some cases, a pattern of carefully managed access. Families argue all the time, and celebrity families even more so. But when multiple people from the same family start describing the exact same experience, it raises a difficult question. Is this just a complicated family drama? Or is there something more deliberate happening behind the scenes? Because according to those closest to the story, the cracks didn't suddenly appear after fame. They began much earlier, and the first person to feel it was a father who suddenly couldn't reach his own daughter. But the truth about how that happened is far more complicated than the headlines ever suggested. Before the royal wedding, before the titles, and before the global spotlight, there was a man quietly working behind the scenes in Hollywood. And that man was Thomas Markle. For decades, Thomas worked as a lighting director in the television industry, spending years on production sets building a steady career and eventually earning recognition in the field. But outside of work, his biggest focus was his daughter. According to multiple interviews he later gave, Thomas helped support Meghan's early ambitions by paying for private schooling and encouraging her interest in acting. And by most accounts, the relationship between father and daughter seemed normal, even close. Friends and colleagues who knew the family described a bond that looked like many others, navigating the ups and downs of growing up. But everything appeared to change once Meghan's life entered the global spotlight. When her relationship with Prince Harry became public, the attention was instant and overwhelming. And suddenly, the Markle family was being scrutinized by tabloids around the world. That's when something unusual began to happen. Thomas later said communication with his daughter became increasingly difficult. Phone calls stopped getting answered, messages went unanswered, and letters, according to him, never received a reply. At first, it seemed like a temporary situation. After all, Meghan was preparing for one of the most high-profile weddings in modern history. But then the silence stretched longer and longer until the situation exploded into headlines. Just weeks before the royal wedding in 2018, paparazzi photos of Thomas Markle appeared in tabloids worldwide, showing him preparing for the wedding, reading books about Britain, getting fitted for a suit, and exercising. And soon afterward, it was revealed that the photos had been staged. The media reaction was immediate. Suddenly, Thomas Markle became the story, portrayed as an embarrassing relative trying to profit from his daughter's royal connection, with headlines painting him as reckless, attention-seeking, and out of control. But Thomas later told a very different version of what had actually happened. According to him, the reason he engaged with photographers in the first place was simple. He was trying to get his daughter's attention, because by that point, he claimed he had no other way to reach her. Whether that explanation is accurate or not has been debated for years, but what's undeniable is what happened next. Thomas Markle did not attend the royal wedding, and from that moment forward, the silence between father and daughter became one of the most talked about estrangements in modern celebrity culture. In interviews that followed, Thomas often sounded less angry than confused, describing how he watched his daughter's life unfold the same way the rest of the world did, through television interviews, newspaper headlines, and royal appearances. Imagine that for a moment. Your child becomes one of the most famous women in the world, and the only way you see her is through a screen. What made the situation even more unsettling was the contrast between two completely different realities. On one side, the public saw speeches about compassion, family, and connection, while on the other side, a father was saying he couldn't even get a phone call returned. That gap between public image and private relationship raised uncomfortable questions. And over time, observers began wondering whether the silence was simply the result of family conflict or whether it had become something more structured. Because as the years passed, Thomas Markle continued to say the same thing. He wasn't ignoring his daughter, he was trying to reach her. But every attempt, according to him, hit the same wall, a wall of complete silence. And while many people dismissed his claims as bitterness, another voice from inside the family was about to complicate the story even further, because the next person to speak out wasn't an outsider. It was Meghan's own sister, and what she revealed about how the relationship changed would introduce an entirely new dimension to the story, one that suggested the distance between family members might not have been accidental at all. And if that was true, it meant the real story had barely begun. But while the story of the father created headlines, the situation became far more complicated when another voice entered the conversation. That voice belonged to Samantha Markle. Unlike Thomas, Samantha didn't just describe emotional distance. She began talking about what she believed was a deliberate transformation of their shared past. Growing up, Samantha says she and Meghan were part of the same extended family environment, seeing each other through different stages of life long before royal titles and global fame entered the picture. But according to her, something shifted as Meghan's public identity grew larger. Samantha claims the family history that once existed privately began appearing in interviews and documentaries in a form she barely recognized. Moments from childhood were presented differently. Relationships that once existed were minimized or erased. To Samantha, it felt as if a new narrative had slowly replaced the old one. And the more she watched interviews and media appearances, the more convinced she became that the version of the story the world was hearing had been carefully rewritten. That belief is what pushed her into the spotlight. While most relatives might stay quiet to avoid controversy, Samantha did the opposite. She began speaking publicly, giving interviews, and eventually filing legal claims challenging statements made about their past. And while critics quickly labeled her bitter or attention-seeking, Samantha insisted her motivation was something much simpler. She believed the truth about their shared history had been altered. And once she started speaking out, she said she realized just how powerful the public narrative had become. As Samantha continued sharing her perspective, she introduced an idea that caught the attention of media commentators and royal observers alike. She described what she believed was an image machine, a system built around shaping the public story of a global figure. According to Samantha and some analysts who followed the situation, modern celebrity culture often relies on carefully curated narratives. Public figures are not just individuals anymore. They become brands. And brands must be managed. Stories must be shaped. Images must be protected. In that environment, the people who appear in the story can become strategic decisions. Some relatives reinforce the narrative, while others complicate it. Samantha suggested that this kind of system may have influenced how certain family relationships were presented publicly. Whether that theory is accurate remains widely debated, but it highlights a larger truth about modern fame. Public figures operate inside massive media ecosystems filled with advisors, strategists, and communications teams. Every appearance, every interview, and every statement can be part of a broader strategy. In such an environment, personal relationships sometimes become entangled with professional messaging. And when that happens, the line between genuine connection and public presentation can become difficult to see. The situation escalated even further when the dispute moved beyond interviews and into the legal system. Samantha Markle filed a defamation lawsuit connected to statements made during high-profile interviews and media appearances. The case attracted international attention because it attempted to challenge the public narrative surrounding Meghan's upbringing. Legal experts began analyzing the claims, debating whether the statements in question crossed the legal threshold for defamation or whether they fell under protected opinion and storytelling. Court documents, legal arguments, and media coverage added another layer of complexity to a story that was already filled with emotion and speculation. While portions of the case were eventually dismissed, the legal battle itself kept the controversy alive and fueled further discussion across the media landscape. Commentators, journalists, and viewers all began asking the same question. How much of the public narrative surrounding high-profile figures is shaped by personal truth? And how much is shaped by strategic storytelling? The courtroom didn't necessarily provide a clear answer, but it did show just how deeply the conflict within the Markle family had grown. What began as a private dispute had now become part of a global media conversation. Stepping back from the drama, the Markle family conflict reveals something larger about the nature of fame in the modern era. Today's celebrities and public figures operate in a world where identity is constantly being constructed in real time. Social media, interviews, documentaries, and public appearances all contribute to an ongoing narrative about who someone is and what their story represents. In many ways, modern fame allows individuals to shape their own mythology. They can highlight certain chapters of their past while leaving others behind. They can present a version of their journey that resonates with audiences around the world. But when that narrative intersects with family history, things become complicated. Families are built on shared memories, and those memories don't always align with the stories that eventually get told to the public. When the two versions collide, misunderstandings and conflicts can emerge. And in the case of Meghan Markle, that collision happened on one of the largest stages imaginable. Every disagreement, every interview, and every statement instantly became global news. What might have remained a private family dispute in another life turned into a debate watched by millions. At the center of this entire story lies a question that goes far beyond one family. Fame has always required a certain amount of performance. Public figures present polished versions of themselves, and audiences often accept those images without seeing the full complexity behind them. But when the people who knew someone before the fame begin telling different stories, it forces us to reconsider how much of what we see is the full picture. In the case of Meghan Markle, three individuals from very different positions: her father Thomas Markle, her mother Doria Ragland, and her sister Samantha Markle, have all described feeling distance from the person the world sees today. Whether their perspectives represent the full truth, partial truth, or simply personal pain is something only those involved can truly know. But their stories raise an uncomfortable possibility about the nature of modern celebrity life. When someone becomes a global figure, their personal history can become part of the brand they represent. And sometimes, the process of protecting that brand creates distance from the people who were there long before the cameras arrived. That's what makes this story so fascinating and so complicated. Because at its core, it isn't just about royalty, fame, or media narratives. It's about family, identity, and the difficult balance between who we were and who the world expects us to become. And maybe the most important question isn't which side of the story is correct. Maybe the real question is how many other perfect public stories are hiding complicated truths behind the scenes.